Hey there, I'm reposting this video. At the end, I'm adding some footage, or a monologue, not really footage, but a monologue kind of explaining the videos to come a little bit better. I like the video itself, that's why I'm keeping it, not redoing the whole thing. But there's a lot of mindset stuff that plays into, especially the first video of this series, that wasn't in the original recording, and I felt it was important to add it for context and for myself, looking back in future years, to really remember how significant this trip was. This was like a very significant trip for me. So go ahead and enjoy the video if you want, or skip to the end, and then check back. I'll have the rest of this series up this week. Hopefully it should all come up this week. I'm just going to slam it up as I get through editing them, and they should all be up within a week. So it should be 4 or 5 videos about my first side trip. Anyway, here's the original intro from a month ago, and I'm just reposting it with some additional footage, like I said. I love a good coffee. Hey, good morning. So, Jeff Not Dead Yet Adventures here. Going through my hard drives. This is February 2025. So, I've been on a little escapade the last 6 months. Haven't been doing much on my channel. And I'm going through my hard drives, trying to clear them all off, trying to consolidate and, cull, I guess is the right word. And I found a bunch of footage, like nearly 1.5 terabytes of footage from a side trip I took back in 2022. So in order for you to understand the next few videos, let me rehash a few things for you. Bucket list on a budget is an idea I came up with back in 2019. 2018, I started traveling. I ended up in the Philippines, and then 2019, I made multiple trips to the Philippines. At the end of 2019, I made a pivotal trip, and it was because I came up with this idea of bucket list on a budget. I had carved my budget in California to where I could afford a weekend trip about every month or 2 months in California. And then I realized that, hey, the same price I can go to, any place in California, I could fly to Vegas, spend the weekend there, and fly home, and it would cost less because of hotel prices and everything. That was 2018. So then I came home from that second trip to Vegas, and I went, well, where else can I go? And I started exploring the internet, started spending a lot of time on budgets, started spending a lot of time researching, and I realized, shit, I could get to the Philippines and back for just a little more than I went to Vegas. And then that opened the door. So after a year of doing a lot of research, a lot of budgeting in my head, a lot of budgeting on paper, a lot of research, doing pricing and everything, I realized that the biggest expense I was spending was traveling to and from the Philippines. And how do I cut that down, right? Well, I just moved to the Philippines. And then once you're in the Philippines, you can travel so many places on a $200 budget. A $200 plane ride will get you a round trip to so many places that I wanted to see, I hadn't seen yet. So this crazy idea popped in my head. Bucket list on a budget is, instead of paying rent in California, just pay rent in the Philippines. I'm going to save money there. I'm already working a really tight budget to travel, right? Prioritizing travel in my budget over most other daily things, right? And then I came up with this plan, bucket list on a budget, and was just live in the Philippines and travel side trips out of there. Well, we all know about the lockdowns. I made my last trip to the Philippines in that time frame in 2020, in February 2020. And then we know what happened after that, right? I just barely got home. Like, Korea was locking down as I came through Korea. So I got home and everything changed, right? But that last trip, I proved my hypothesis. I went to the Philippines, I made a side trip to Bali, came back to the Philippines, and then came home. And that side trip was easy, cheap, really, really cheap. And so, I proved the theory, proved the idea, right? Um, and then the lockdown happened, and then I was desperate to get out of California. It was driving me crazy. So I ended up in the Azores, and my new plan, because of the Europe SageGen, everything was still locked down in Asia, but in Europe it was starting to open up. And in the SageGen, or I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, treaty is you get 90 days in, 90 days out. So my plan was to spend 90 days in, 90 days out, and that would put me on a 3-month rotation. So the idea was the first month I move someplace, I save. Second month I go on a side trip. And the third month I save and move to a new location. And that would be in and out of the SageGen. So I keep the 90-day window, right, rolling. It's a rolling 90 days. So as long as you're out 90 days, you can come back for 90 days. And that was my plan. So a 3-month slow roll, right? And I started to do that, and it was great. This is my first side trip. When I started the bucket list on a budget, I started to implement it in full force. This was my first side trip. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through with some photos today, and then I'm going to do separate little videos of everywhere I went, and then wrap it up. So this will be like 4 or 5 videos in total. But what I did is I found a house sitting gig on the Azores, Ponta Delgata. That's a city or island, I don't know. But I was in the Azores, and part of the house sitting was I had to leave for 10 days. So it worked out perfect for me to test this theory, right? So from there, I went to Lisbon. I spent the day in Lisbon, and then I flew to Venice. Venice really sucked. I didn't enjoy Venice. Then I went south from Venice to Corfu. And then I took the ferry across to Saranda. I really wanted to get to Albania because I was thinking Albania was my next stop, and I wanted to kind of test that out, right? I wanted to like see if that's someplace I wanted to hang out for a while. And then from Albania, my plans changed quite a bit. And then I went back to Italy. Took a ferry to Bari, and then from Bari I went up to Porto. And then from Porto, I spent a few days in Porto, and then I went back to Ponta Delgata. So I'm going to kind of break all that out in their own separate little videos. And a lot of this, like I said, a long time ago on one of my early videos, a lot of this is just for me to, remember where I've been and the fun times I've had. It's the other side of that is, I want to show people if I can do this, you can do it. If I can live the best season of my life, you can too. And it's a matter of just finding what you want and pursuing it. And pursuing it with a different level of vigor or passion or dedication than what you've been doing up until now. If you're not happy with the way things are, change. And if an old dog like me can change, you can too. If somebody who barely passed high school can wander the world on a small budget, you definitely can too. If I can go from the worst season of my life to the best season of my life, in under a year, you can too. And, that's a big part of any message I would like to put out there is if I can do it, you can probably do it better. If I can do YouTube, you can probably do YouTube better. If I can travel, you can probably travel better. But this is me. This is what I'm doing. I'm loving my life. I've made a lot of changes in my life in the last 5 years. And, everything's gotten better. Yeah, I've had the ups and downs just like everybody. I've had the problems. I've had the issues. I've had the, whatever. But, life gets really good when you decide to get off the couch, throw the microwave in the trash, and get out and see the world. I struggle when I meet people with this downer attitude because I used to be that guy, and I know you don't have to live that way. So if you want to follow along, great. There will be more coming about what I've been doing this year, but right now I'm just kind of culling my hard drives, like I said, and I want to take all this random fragments, put it together in something that is somewhat digestible for me in the future, and put it out there, and then I'll move on to what I'm doing this year. I've got this really I got so many stories. Every day of my life, nearly every day of my life, is a fabulous story I'd like to share with people. But you know, it's too much, right? It's too much. So I'm gonna go over this bucket list on a budget idea in these videos and kind of show you, how it worked for me, how it started, and then eventually, you can go back and look at some of my other videos. They're all just kind of random. So my goal this year with YouTube is to kind of make it more linear, more digestible, make it more have it make more sense, because I've just been kind of posting random shit everywhere, and like I said in video recently, the last thing on my mind at the end of the day is YouTube. I'm more active out doing other things, enjoying life in the real world than I am on YouTube and or online. So you know if I could encourage anybody to do anything, is live more in the real world and less online, right? Less on social media and less here, less there. The real world is where the real perks and benefits and rewards come from. And I just can't stress that enough. So anyway, the next video hopefully will be about me leaving the Azores and traveling to somewhere. We'll see. We'll see where I cut it off. I'm going to kind of break it up, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day. This is a add-on to the previous video, obviously. And the previous video, I outlined the mechanics of what was happening at the time, but I didn't really get into the emotional or the decision making or any of that. And that's just as critical as the what, why, and where. Was the how, right? And the how was very challenging for me. So this was 2022, summer of 2022. I had just escaped America. When I left America, everything went sideways. I had some health issues pop up right as I was on my way out. I had a lot of issues, a lot of problems, just, were trying to bite me in the ass on my way out of America. So, it was a situation where I had this golden plan and the plan went to shit and I didn't adapt well. And I was literally running to the airport, hastily running to the airport. I booked a storage unit on the way to the airport because I originally planned on dropping off, the few items I wanted to keep with a friend, and that wasn't going to work. So I made it to a storage unit, and I hadn't slept much in 2 days. I hadn't showered in an appropriate time frame. Let's just leave it at that. And so I get to the airport and my bags are overpacked. So I'm literally at the airport and they're trying to charge me an obscene amount of money. So I'm literally like throwing away new bundles of socks because I way overpacked. I overpacked on everything. So the first month on San Miguel, so it's the island in the Azores, Ponta Delgado is the city, and I was outside the city in a little village or whatever on San Miguel. But the first month, pretty much all I did was sleep and figure out how to shop and eat and get to town and back and figure out the mechanics, and just I slept and read a lot. It was just a decompression cycle. And so when this trip rolled around, I had to leave the house sitting for a short period that was predetermined, and it was great for me because it was a way to test the side trip, right? The slow roll moving, the 3-month moving cycle with a side trip in the middle month. This was the perfect test for that, to see if it was going to work. And the one thing that I had started doing about 2 years before this is I wasn't happy with a lot of things in my life. So I really focused hard on identifying what I'm not good at, identifying what my problem areas are, and just addressing them head on, straightforward. Just get off the couch and do it, right? and it was actually, I started doing this long before that, but this trip was kind of a culmination of a lot of those issues that I was bad at. And I was essentially going cold turkey and just on this little side trip, essentially going cold turkey and just going for it. So to give you like some background so you can kind of understand how big of a deal this was for me. Um, I had no place, like the idea of not booking hotels months in advance was very difficult for me. The idea that I was just going to, roll forward and, sort it out as I go was very difficult to me because I was always, at the time, I was always very concerned about having, three plans, the primary plan. And then if something goes wrong, I can go to the secondary. And if that goes wrong, move on to the third plan. And hopefully it never goes beyond third plan. There are times in my life where it has, but um, it was just the idea of moving forward like that, And so let me give you some context. Like I was living in Northern California, and it was about 2.5 hours to Sacramento, 2 hours to Sacramento, uh, or the Bay Area was about 2 hours, I guess. Yeah, about 2 hours to the Bay Area. So if I was going to go to the Bay Area to see my friends in my car or a rental car at times, right? I would have probably at least a half case of water bottles from Costco. I would have food for at least a day or two, and I'd have two or three changes of clothes just to go to the Bay Area, 2 hours away. And then I would have tools. I would have, this or that or whatever. And it was just this like obsessive compulsive, overpacking and preparedness and like, um, it was just ridiculous. It was just a really ridiculous phase in my life. And that kind of showed through when I left America. I packed a ton of stuff, knowing that I was going to, attrition or whittle it down a little, and the best movie, I always forget the name of that movie, but Reese Witherspoon, she's hiking the Pacific Crest Trail in the movie, and the beginning of that movie, where she hits the trail is great because it kind of shows like the typical traveler's mistake, right? She didn't have fuel for her stove, and then when she got to the first waypoint, where there's other hikers and stuff, the guy's going through her bag with her and like, get rid of this, get rid of that, get rid of this, and all these things, right? And that was just such a great moment because I think anybody who's traveled a lot has been through something similar. And I'd planned on that. So I took a bunch of things, not knowing exactly what I would want or need. Um, and then I planned on, it tapering it down to a more trim package. But this trip, I did all that in the extreme, like here and now. I had that small 18-liter Scarab backpack. I was going for, I think it was 10 or 11 days. And the idea of even going on a 2-day trip with that pack before was just absurd. There was like no way I could even think about it. Um, and I just went for it. I just packed my bags and went for it. I had, when I left, I had the flight booked to Italy, and that was it. So I had my flight booked from the Azores to Venice, and I had left it open to where I could stay in Venice or not. I can't remember when I booked a hotel in Venice, but I'm pretty sure it was last minute. I'm pretty sure I booked a hotel in Venice once I got to Lisbon. Now, I had a rough idea of what I wanted to do. My rough idea was I wanted to go to the flight patterns that were cheap at the time because I track flight patterns like routes that are cheap. So at that time, the route that was cheap was going from Lisbon to Venice to Corfu, and then back to Porto, and then back to São Miguel, Ponta Delgada on São Miguel. But just the absurdity. Oh, excuse me. or just the idea that I was going to travel without, hard plans laid in was just crazy for me. Um, and then this first leg of the trip that will be in the next video, there were all kinds of problems, and so I'll lay all that out. But that kind of gives you some background in my mindset. Is that I was actively trying to do things I wasn't good at. I was actively pushing the envelope of traveling smaller and lighter, which, I was used to traveling at, if an average person would carry one bag, I would carry three or four, right? And so to cut it down to half of what I would imagine the average person would carry was just, extreme. And I also didn't really have my legs under me. I was still struggling to walk. I didn't have the mobility that I enjoy now, and you know, walking all day was not a possibility. There's a lot of things that I grew into, and I lost a lot of weight after this trip. It was actually about 6 months after this trip I started actually losing significant poundage, but this was just a shit or get off the pot moment, right? Either you're gonna step up and go for it or you're not. And I made it out of America, and I was adjusting to being on the road, and this was the next step in that transition. And so it was a very challenging time, and to go and then to try and film and do all this, it was really looking back, I'm very happy with everything that came out of that trip. But that's so putting together the next video that you're going to see in this series was really hard, because I'm missing a lot of footage I thought I had, because I was filming on two different phones and two different cameras, and so shit gets lost in the shuffle. But I'm more happy with it now than I was a month ago. A month ago I was very frustrated. I couldn't tell the story exactly how I wanted to. So this is what we get now. And that's a long monologue. So if you listened to it all, thank you. If you didn't, I understand. And you'll never see this anyway, right? But yeah, that's where I'm at. And that kind of fills in the gaps. The next video is a little clumsy, and it's going to have a few more of these monologue explanations. And then the next video gets better and better as we go. But it was a really fun trip. I learned a lot. I made a lot of mistakes, as you'll see. So I hope you hang in there. There's a lot of lessons to learn on my mistakes, and I love it. I love it when other people can learn from my mistakes. Thank you. See you.